Hello everyone, this is Mr. Millette with an AP World History presentation. Today's presentation is all about religion and belief systems within the early modern period of world history. In the previous presentation, we learned about the role that religion played in the maintenance of some of the world's most successful early modern land-based empires. We saw that religion, as it was placed in the hands of leaders and political elites, could be used as a tool to keep social order. Oftentimes, leaders chose to favor a particular religion and even act intolerant to different religions in an effort to force conformity of their subjects. In contrast, some leaders allowed for religious diversity and pluralism by promoting religious tolerance in spite of their own personal belief systems. We also saw that religious architecture was utilized to demonstrate power, wealth, and prestige of ruling elites in early modern land-based empires. Religion throughout world history is a fluid, adaptive, and expansive process, and it tends to change once political elites get their hands on it and alter it to meet their personal and political agendas. Religions often divide and conflict at the hands of political elites who manipulate religion for their own personal and political gains. Likewise, religions will often synchronize as elites attempt to make their religious beliefs appealing to new or foreign populations. Today, we will take a deeper look at religious beliefs and their transformations during the early modern period of world history between 1450 and 1750. By the end of this presentation, you will be expected to be able to demonstrate your understanding of this learning objective. Explain continuity and change within the various belief systems during the period from 1450 to 1750. Throughout pre-modern world history, it was evident that religions were not stagnant, but rather they were fluid, adaptive, and expansive. It was common in pre-modern times for societies to alter their belief systems for the purpose of increasing their appeal or diffusing them to foreign lands. Buddhism and Christianity were good examples of religions that were altered as they moved beyond their respective places of origin. Additionally, it was common for sectarian divisions to emerge out of struggles of leadership, rituals, and cornerstone beliefs. Buddhism's many sectarian divisions, which were based on levels of adherence to the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, created entire unique identities among a multitude of Buddhist societies across Asia. Islam, from its near inception, was divided between Sunni and Shia divisional sects, due to disagreements regarding the perspectives on Muhammad and the succession of the Caliph. Christianity experienced a schism in the 11th century between the Roman Catholics of Western Europe and the Orthodox Christians of the Byzantine Empire, which had been predicated on power struggles between the Pope from Rome and the Byzantine Emperor and his patriarch from Constantinople. After 1450, several regions throughout Afro-Eurasia experienced alterations to their traditional belief systems. In some cases, those religious changes were responses against traditional practices, rituals, or practices by religious elites. In other ways, regional empires rivaled one another, and in that rivalry, political elites drew on religious distinction to propagate their respective religious systems. As well, some religious change came as a merging of belief systems within a particular region, a sort of religious or cultural syncretism. Regardless of the reasoning, these religious alterations became one of the primary ways groups of people identified themselves as distinct from others, which ultimately had drastic political, social, and cultural implications on Afro-Eurasian societies during the early modern period. The first example of religious change in the early modern period is the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And if we break the term down, we can understand the essence of the movement. First, within the word Protestant, we hear the word protest, as in protesting some practice or belief on the grounds that it is inaccurate, immoral, impractical, or corrupted. Secondly, within the word Reformation, we hear the word reform, as in to remake or improve a faulty or corrupted entity. In essence, the Protestant reformers sought to identify the Catholic Church's abuses and protest those abuses in an effort to effect religious and righteous change. Of course, those in power and those close to the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church were not interested in entertaining any protest or effort at reform. For over a millennia, the Roman Catholic Church had reigned supreme over European societies. From the late 4th century CE, the Roman Empire's protection and adoption of Christianity as its state religion enabled the faith's popularity to increase. In fact, in spite of the failure of the Western Roman Empire to retain its political authority over Europe in the 5th century CE, Roman Catholicism remained the single cultural unifier of the people of Europe. Germanic kingdoms soon adopted Catholicism, and the institution of the Roman Catholic Church strengthened its position in Europe. Over the next millennia, the Roman Catholic Church came to monopolize beliefs, law, social services, healthcare provisions, academic studies, and education. Those that dared to challenge those papal monopolies found themselves excommunicated, or worse, executed for their blasphemy and heresy. The Catholic Church and its command of Christian belief had an answer and justification for every action. From sin to salvation, birth to death, and everything in between, the Catholic Church shaped the minds and relative obedience of Europeans. However, as the post-classical period drew to a close, and Europe's economic, demographic, and social order had been shaken up by the outbreak of the Black Death, many Europeans failed to accept the Church's explanations regarding the disease and its victims. While the plague had been declared a divine punishment for mankind's sins, righteous and pious Christians who had witnessed their family members contract and suffer the wrath of God failed to accept this institutional explanation. For those that survived the plague, an age of recovery brought new social and economic opportunity. And in time, recovery brought forth new ideologies and developments that countered the tradition of the Church. In the Italian city-states, demographic and economic recovery happened first. Cities such as Venice, Florence, Milan, and Rome all experienced an increase in productivity and commercial activity. Political and economic elites within these city-states sought ways to beautify and enhance their cities' urban aesthetics. They were quick to patronize artists and architects who could paint, sculpt, or engineer buildings and visual arts that signified the city's recovery. Intellectuals took to the classical works of the Greeks and Romans, two societies who had experienced intellectual and economic golden ages, in order to find relevance and motivation for the improvement of humankind. These Italian humanists altered the perspective on humanity, as they believed human life was much more than just an arduous journey to the afterlife. Rather, humanists believed that human life had an alternative purpose, which was to prioritize the human experience by capitalizing on humanity's talents, gifts, individuality, and creativity in order to improve human existence. This period of recovery became known as the Renaissance, and though it did not directly challenge the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, as in some cases, its arts and architecture continued to promote that authority. It did showcase a new view on humanity and a new worldview altogether. The Renaissance became the stepping stone to other movements that would challenge the vestiges of post-classical Europe. The Renaissance and humanism did not remain isolated to the Italian city-states, but rather became a European-wide movement. As the Renaissance and its humanist ideology diffused north, it took on new qualities. During the 15th century, a German by the name of Johann Gutenberg engineered the first printing press in Europe. And with that printing press, more Bibles and religious commentaries were published and diffused throughout Europe than ever before. Much like the Italian humanists who saw an improvement in humanity, Christian humanists of Northern Europe sought spiritual improvement so as to improve Christian society and make people better Christians. With the printing press, Christian humanists published Bibles printed in vernacular languages, as opposed to Latin, breaking up one of the religious monopolies long held by the Catholic Church. Additionally, their religious commentaries criticized and challenged the Church's authority and its practices, and offered new ideas and directions for Christians to worship. One practice that Christian humanists focused on was the Church's practice of the sale of indulgences, which was the practice of selling certificates of indulgence to its worshippers in return for the remission of their sins. As early reformers would put it, a method of buying one's way into heaven. No individual was more responsible for addressing these types of abuses than the German Catholic monk and theologian Martin Luther. Luther published his 95 Theses in 1517, which was a publication that explicitly spelled out 95 abuses, corruptions, and issues he observed in church practice. The 95 Theses eventually made it to Pope Leo X, who demanded Luther's presence at the Council of Worms in order to give him a chance to recant his claims. Luther attended, but refused to recant, and as a consequence, Luther was excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church. Luther could have very well accepted his eternal damnation, crawled into a hole, and died, and history would have never knew his name. But he didn't do that, and instead he formed a new sect of Christianity, known as the Lutheran Church, a movement that sought to break away from the papacy's leadership, emphasize individualistic interpretations of the Bible, and prioritize the notion that every Christian would be saved solely by his or her faith in God. Over time, this Lutheran movement's popularity led to great divide, tension, and conflict between these Christian sections. Within 20 years of Luther, the King of England, Henry VIII of the Tudor dynasty, took a personal and political challenge to Pope Clement VII when the Pope rejected Henry's request for an annulment to his first marriage. In response, Henry and his parliament declared the English monarchs to be the supreme head of a new Church of England and forced papal loyalists to leave England. In essence, each congregation was converted to an Anglican church that accepted the king's supremacy. Granted, Henry did not oversee virtually any religious or ritualistic changes to distinguish his church from the Catholic Church. Rather, he just emphasized the difference in leadership. Over time, this Church of England's popularity led to great divide, tension, and conflict between these Christian sections. By the middle of the 16th century, the Roman Catholic Church was no longer the cultural unifier it had been for the past millennia. The Catholics and the Pope did not remain idle and just simply watch the northern portion of Europe fall to Protestantism. Rather, it fought back and tried to reclaim its monopoly on all of Europe. But as the Lutheran movement and the English Reformation popularized new Protestant movements such as the Calvinist and Anabaptist movements, the leaders of the Catholic Church had to become more adamant in their counter. In the second half of the 16th century, the Pope and his leadership inaugurated the Counter-Reformation, or Catholic Reformation, in order to combat the success of Protestantism. Eclipsed by the Convention of the Council of Trent, the Catholic Reformation looked to reclaim papal supremacy, the Church's monopoly on the Bible and its revelation, and its membership in and out of Europe. The Council of Trent aimed to utilize Baroque art and architecture to emphasize the power, wealth, and prestige of the Catholic Church over the simplicity of Protestantism. The Council also attempted to combat the printing press by listing Protestant and scientific publications on the Tridentine Index as banned publications. However, the greatest action the Counter-Reformation took to counter the success of Protestantism was the development of the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. The Jesuits were an order of aggressive Catholic missionaries that sought to forcibly reconvert Protestants to Catholicism and spread Catholicism abroad. Though this division within Christianity would never be reunified in history, it continued the harsh realities of Europe's traditions of religious zeal, religious intolerance, religious persecution, and religious conflict. Europe was not the only region of the world that experienced religious change, division, tension, and conflict. Throughout the Middle East and Central Asia, Islam's Sunni and Shia sectarian division intensified in conflict during the 16th century. In review, during the post-classical period was when Islam emerged as a world religion. In the early 7th century, the Prophet Muhammad took the message of Allah to the people of Arabia, and in the wake of his death, There were those who believed the prophecy was sealed and that Muhammad was the last of the prophets of Allah. Those Sunni Muslims who believed this notion of the seal of the prophecy supported the rise of Abu Bakr as the first caliph of the Ummah, or Islamic community. However, another group of Muslims believed differently, in that they believed the prophecy continued and Allah's message could be continuously spread by the righteous descendants of Muhammad. Those Shia Muslims who believed in the continuation of the prophecy supported the rise of Ali as the first caliph of the Ummah. Incidentally, the groups turned to conflict, and in the midst of that conflict, Ali was assassinated and the sectarian division solidified. Roll the world history clock forward 900 years, and the tensions and conflicts between the Sunni and the Shia found themselves intensified. During the 16th century, two Islamic gunpowder empires competed for control over disputed territories in the Middle East and Central Asia, as well as jockeyed for the position of the leader of the Dar al-Islam. These two competing empires were the Safavid Empire, a Shia Muslim empire, and the Ottoman Empire, a Sunni Muslim empire. The Safavid Empire, a resurrected Persian empire centralized in Iran, came to prominence with the success and leadership of Shah Ismail. Having promoted himself as the 12th Imam, a reincarnation of Muhammad, and the Mahdi, Ismail brought the Iranian peoples under his Twelver Shi'ism religion. Ismail was known for his forceful spread of Twelver Shi'ism throughout Iran and the populations he conquered throughout Central Asia. In fact, Twelver Shi'ism became a unique aspect of the cultural identity of the Safavids. Shia Islam is the minority sect, as it only makes up about 1/5 of all Muslims in the world. Beyond that small fraction, the Shia sect lends itself to further breakdowns and subsects, as political and military leaders throughout history have declared themselves descendants of Muhammad and have established numerous smaller Shia caliphates. However, for the Safavids, this brand of Shia Islam, the Twelver movement, separated them from any other form of Islam during the early modern period. Shah Ismail I was a very successful conqueror of the peoples and lands in and near Iran. In fact, at the end of his initial campaigns, Ismail had acquired territory from the southern coast of the Caspian Sea to the northern coast of the Persian Gulf, and included the island city of Hormuz. However, the Safavids disputed with the Ottomans over territories in modern-day Azerbaijan, Georgia, Iraq, and eastern Turkey. Ismail made a lofty attempt at battling the Ottoman Empire in northwestern Iran at the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514. And although Ismail's soldiers were disciplined and well-trained, they were not capable of defeating the Ottomans. At the time, the elite fighting force of the Safavid Empire was the Qizilbash, an Iranian military with precision archers and expert cavalrymen. The problem with the Qizilbash by the time of the Battle of Chaldiran was that the Ottomans had long transitioned to the use of gunpowder, whereas the Qizilbash found the use of gunpowder to be unmanly and refused to reform themselves. The Battle of Chaldiran demonstrated a point of great intensification of the conflict between the Sunni and Shia Muslims in the early modern period. This defeat absolutely devastated Ismail politically and personally. He lived out his final days without the prestige and prowess he once wielded over the people of Iran. In spite of Ismail's decline, Twelver Shi'ism would live on within the Safavid Empire through Ismail's successors. After the defeat at Chaldiran, Ismail's successors would reform their military by adopting gunpowder, so as to defend Safavid territory, and in some cases reconquer territories they had lost in battle, and once again rekindling the tension between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Shah Abbas the Great, who reigned from 1588 to 1629, was most instrumental in reforming the Safavid military and equipping his soldiers with firearms. He was also successful in restoring many of the Safavids' lost territories after successful campaigns against the Ottoman and Mughal empires, carving out its territory as a fixture in the early modern period. In spite of Shah Abbas's efforts at making the Safavid Empire the prominent Islamic empire of the early modern period, it would be the Ottoman Empire that would ultimately take that title for itself. with the Ottoman Empire's conquest of Constantinople and defeat of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, the political landscape of the Middle East would be forever changed. After dethroning the Christian Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire expanded greatly throughout the next century. As early as 1514, Ottoman Sultan Selim I utilized his gunpowder-based military to defeat the Safavid Empire at the Battle of Chaldiran, near the modern border between Iran and Azerbaijan. This victory brought eastern Anatolia and northern Iraq under Ottoman control. Additionally, in 1517, Selim expanded the Ottoman Empire into Arabia. His expansion brought the cities of Medina and Mecca under Ottoman protection. Holding and protecting these holy sites of Islam meant that the Ottoman Empire was the leader of the Islamic world and that a Sunni Muslim empire guarded over the great mosque of Mecca and the Kaaba. Selim also mobilized his military across the Red Sea and brought Mamluk Egypt under Ottoman control. His conquest of Egypt was a great Sunni victory over Shia Islam once again. Egypt had a long history of Shia Islam after the dissolution of the Umayyad Caliphate in the 8th century. The establishment of a Shia Muslim state, known as the Fatimid Caliphate, in the 10th century had made Shia Islam a staple of North Africa. Eventually, with the establishment of the Mamluk Caliphate in Egypt during the 13th century, Shia Islam would be promoted in North Africa once again. However, that promotion would only be realized until Selim's conquests of Egypt in the 16th century, which brought Egypt under Ottoman control until the middle of the 19th century. A third example of religious change in the early modern period was the rise of Sikhism in India. India had a long history of religious diversity. Though Hinduism had long solidified itself as the popular religion of India, it was in no way the only religion in India. Hinduism gave way to the developments of Jainism and Buddhism during the classical period. Additionally, during the post-classical period, Islam made its way into India through conquest, trade, migration, and mission work. Although religious diversity did often lend itself to religious conflict, that was not necessarily always the case for India. In fact, Islamic Sufis from Arabia and other parts of the Dar al-Islam traveled to India to engage in dialogue with Hindu Brahmins. A level of respectful communication and learning emerged between the two groups of religious intellectuals, and many Hindu Brahmins took to Muslim ways of devotion. As they observed Muslims' devout practices to Allah, many Hindu sought to increase their devotion to their divine trinity. The sharing of practices and mindsets toward the divine coalesced into the Bhakti movement in India, a sect of Hinduism that sought to increase its devotional practices to Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. At different points in India's post-classical and early modern history, Islam forcibly entered the Buddhist and Hindu populations. Those were dark and destructive times for those communities, as Muslim warriors ravaged the northern portions of modern-day India and Pakistan. The first to do this was the Turkish leader Mahmud of Ghazni and his band of Muslim warriors that established the Delhi Sultanate across northern India. Later in the 16th century, another Turkish warrior would forcibly enter India, and that was Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire in India. It is against this dichotomous backdrop of India's history of religious integration and religious conflict that Sikhism was born. Sikhism developed as a third path to salvation, differing from a Hindu or Islamic path during the 16th century. It was spawned from a history of Islamic and Hindu integration between Hindu Bhaktas and Sufi mystics. Its founder, Guru Nanak, lived during the invasion and reign of Babur in the Delhi Sultanate. Babur was destructive toward Hindu temples and the early Sikh community, or the Panth. This was a stressful and dark time for Sikhs, as they referred to it as a Kali Yuga. Guru Nanak can be compared with Siddhartha Gautama and Mahavira for coming from a higher Hindu caste, embracing equality, and his experiential dimension of having been submerged in a river, meditated for multiple days, and then returned to instruct his disciples. Guru Nanak's teachings were learned and diffused by his disciples, or gurus, or seekers of knowledge, hence the term Sikhism, a belief based on those who seek the knowledge of Guru Nanak's teachings. Nanak's teachings were recorded in the Sikh holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib. Sikhism is a monotheistic religion that teaches the perfection and omnipresence of God. Sikhs practice daily prayer, which involves recitations from the Guru Granth Sahib, as well as kirtan, or chanting and singing to God. Sikhism also involves many stories of miracle work, to include stories of gurus curing diseases, enduring torture, vanishing dead bodies, and the sacrifice of the 5 beloved ones, who were said to have been beheaded as a sacrifice and then resurrected by Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, or seeker of wisdom. In the testimony of witnesses of the Sikh miracle story, the 5 beloved ones were adorned with the 5 Ks of Sikh attire, which became the standard dress of Sikhs in India, as a way of giving them distinction from Hindus and Muslims. The Sikh 5 Ks include Kes, a word simply meaning hair, and as a Sikh vow refers to uncut hair, which is to be kept in a turban. Kirpan, a short sword or knife, as a representation of justice, dignity, and wisdom. Karha, a steel wristband, worn as a reminder to the individual's servitude to God. Kanja, a wooden comb worn in the hair knot and used to keep the long hair clean. And 5, Kashura, shorts worn as an undergarment for modesty in the covering of the thighs and upper legs. Sikhism also includes 3 central teachings. 1, work hard to earn an honest living, as a way of abandoning asceticism. 2, share one's earnings with the rest of the Pantha. And 3, remember God at all times and in everything. In the late 16th century, Sikhism would experience a period of relaxed religious tolerance. During the reign of Babur's grandson, Akbar the Great, the Sikh community thrived. Akbar was known for his policies of religious tolerance and the removal of taxes on non-Muslims. And against this backdrop, the Sikhs were able to carve out their small place in the diverse religious landscape of India. The Golden Temple, Sikhism's holiest site, was built in Amritsar in the Punjab region of India during the reign of Akbar. However, this period of religious tolerance would only last through the life and reign of Akbar, and the Sikh experience became bleak again. During the reign of Aurangzeb, Akbar's grandson, religious toleration ended, and Sunni Islam was forced on many Hindus and Sikhs, another Kali Yuga. In fact, the 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, was martyred as he was tortured and beheaded by Aurangzeb's orders. In spite of this aggression against the Sikhs, the Golden Temple was maintained, and Sikh identity survived through the remainder of the early modern period.